What just happened inside the Hungarian parliament wasn't politics. It was a reckoning. Péter Magyar didn't walk into that chamber to ask polite questions. He walked in with evidence, with fury, and with something far more dangerous to Viktor Orbán than any opposition party had ever managed to bring. He walked in as someone who used to be on the inside. And when he started speaking, the room realized immediately that this was different. This wasn't an attack from an enemy. This was testimony from a witness. Orbán has faced critics before. He has faced protests, international pressure, EU investigations, and years of sustained opposition. None of it moved him, because none of it came from someone who knew exactly how the machine worked. Magyar did, and that is what made this moment unlike anything the Hungarian parliament had seen in 15 years. The exchange began with a question that seemed almost too simple. Magyar stood and asked about the children's homes. Not about EU funds, not about geopolitics, not about the media empire, about children, about the state-run institutions that had been placed under the oversight of foundations controlled by government-connected figures, about reports that had circulated internally for months, reports that raised serious concerns about conditions inside those facilities, reports that the government had quietly shelved. The room went still, because everyone in that chamber knew what Magyar was referencing. The documents existed. The reports existed, and the decision to bury them had not happened by accident. It had happened at the direction of people sitting in that very room. Orbán's response was immediate, and it was loud. He didn't engage with the question. He attacked the questioner. He called Magyar a traitor. He called him a puppet of foreign interests. He accused him of working against Hungary. Each accusation came faster than the last, voice rising, finger pointing, the full force of the Prime Minister's political theater deployed in real time against one man standing in the opposition benches. And Magyar didn't flinch. That was the moment that changed the atmosphere, because Hungarians watching had seen this playbook before. They had watched Orbán demolish critics with exactly this kind of performance for over a decade. Raise the volume, question the loyalty, redirect the audience, and by the time the noise dies down, the original question has been buried under the rubble. But Magyar simply waited, and when the noise subsided, he asked again, "What happened to those reports?" It was 4 words, and they landed like a verdict, because the answer to that question was not in dispute. The reports had been filed through official channels. They had been received by the relevant ministry. And then, according to internal accounts that Magyar had obtained, they had been reclassified, not investigated, not addressed, reclassified, moved into a category that made them inaccessible to parliamentary oversight, inaccessible to the press, and inaccessible to the public. Magyar named the ministry. He named the date the reports were received. He named the official who signed off on the reclassification. He read it directly into the parliamentary record. Orbán's allies immediately moved to interrupt. Points of order were raised. The session chairman was called upon to manage the chamber. The noise level climbed again. But the names were already in the record. The dates were already in the record, and no procedural maneuver could remove them. This is what made Magyar so difficult to dismiss. Every time Orbán's machine tried to reframe the confrontation as a political spectacle, Magyar returned to specifics, not accusations. Specifics, documents, names, dates, signatures, the kind of material that doesn't evaporate under pressure because it was never just an argument. It was evidence. And evidence has a way of surviving even the loudest rooms. To understand why this particular clash carried so much weight, you have to understand who Péter Magyar is, or rather, who he was. Until not long ago, he was not an opposition figure. He was connected through family and through professional circles to the governing network itself. He moved in those spaces. He understood how decisions were made. He understood what was said in private and what was presented in public, and he understood from the inside the distance between those two things. When he decided to step forward, he didn't do it as a politician looking for a platform. He did it as someone who had seen something he believed the public needed to know. That distinction matters enormously because it changes how his words land, not as opposition rhetoric, but as first-hand account. Orbán's government understood this immediately, and that is why the response to Magyar had been so visceral from the beginning. The attacks on his character, the accusations of foreign influence, the attempts to frame him as a destabilizing agent rather than a concerned citizen, all of it was designed to do one thing: discredit the messenger before the message could take hold. But by the time Magyar stood in that parliament chamber, the message had already taken hold. Tens of thousands of Hungarians had come out into the streets, not organized by a party structure, not mobilized by a traditional opposition campaign, mobilized by what Magyar had said publicly, by what he had documented, and by the simple recognition that someone was finally saying out loud what many had quietly believed for years, that the system was not broken by accident, that the dysfunction was the design. Back in the chamber, Magyar shifted to a second line of questioning. This one was about the courts, about specific cases in which Hungarian judges had reported receiving pressure through informal channels, pressure to deliver verdicts aligned with government interests in cases that touched the ruling network. The judges who had reported this had not gone public. They had filed internal complaints through the judicial oversight body, and those complaints, Magyar alleged, had disappeared into the same reclassification system as the children's home reports. Orbán did not answer this either. His allies again raised procedural challenges. A spokesperson from the governing party stepped forward to accuse Magyar of spreading disinformation. The word disinformation was used 3 times in under a minute, as if repetition could make the documents in Magyar's hand disappear. It could not. Because here is the thing about a system built on secrecy. It is extraordinarily effective right up until the moment someone on the inside decides to stop keeping the secrets. Then every wall that was built to keep information contained becomes a wall that confirms the information was worth containing. Every reclassification becomes evidence of what was being reclassified. Every procedural interruption becomes proof that the question deserved an answer. Orbán has been masterful for 15 years at controlling the environment in which he is questioned. He controls the media that covers him. He controls the institutions that might investigate him. He controls the legal framework that defines what can and cannot be challenged. Within that controlled environment, accountability becomes nearly impossible, because accountability requires an independent space in which the question and the answer can both be heard clearly. Magyar created that space anyway, not by changing the environment, but by refusing to behave as if the environment had power over the truth. That is why the clash was explosive. Not because of raised voices or dramatic gestures, but because something happened in that chamber that Orbán's machine had not been able to prevent. A man stood up with documents and refused to sit down until the documents had been entered into the record. And now they are there, permanently. Part of the official account of what was said, by whom and when. Orbán can attack Magyar's character. He can question his motives. He can deploy every instrument of a media apparatus built over 15 years to shape how Hungarians perceive this moment. But he cannot change what is in the parliamentary record. He cannot unname the ministry. He cannot undate the reclassification order. He cannot unsign the signature that Magyar read aloud. That is what power looks like when it is finally cornered. Not calm, not confident, loud, reactive. Reaching for personal attacks because the factual ground has become too dangerous to stand on. And for millions of Hungarians watching, that reaction was its own kind of answer. The question now is what comes next, because moments like this one do not resolve themselves. They either build into something that forces a reckoning, or they are absorbed by the noise and forgotten. Orbán is counting on the second outcome. He has seen movements rise and fall before. He has watched outrage peak and then dissipate. He has learned that if you can survive the first wave, the second is usually smaller. But Magyar is not a wave. He is a record, and records do not dissipate. The documents he brought into that chamber will still exist next month and next year. The names he read into the record will still be there. The questions he asked, the ones that were never answered, will still be waiting. And every time Orbán's government attempts to move forward as if that session never happened, those unanswered questions will be there to remind anyone paying attention that something was asked and nothing was said. That is the real danger Magyar represents. Not a political campaign, not an election strategy, a permanent, documented, publicly entered account of what this government was asked and refused to answer. And in a system built on the assumption that accountability can always be delayed long enough to become irrelevant, that kind of record is the most threatening thing imaginable. The chamber has gone quiet again. The session moved on. Other business was conducted, but the names are still in the record. The dates are still in the record, and the question is still unanswered. What happened to those reports? Orbán screamed. Magyar waited, and the silence that followed the screaming was louder than anything either man said.